Alrighty, guys. Today we are talking about Dawn of Worlds. So, what is Dawn of Worlds? It is a game where everyone takes the role of a god and we all work together to create a world. So, this most recent session has been my third time giving this game a shot. It was, overall, pretty decent session. Any session of Dawn of Worlds where we managed to get an entire game done in a single sitting, I consider an accomplishment. So overall, I'm going to give it a thumbs up for that alone, at the very least. But this session in particular has definitely been on the side of some of the greater disparity in engagement I've ever encountered between people that I've had in any game like this. Like the people who were into it, they seemed like they could really get into it and were enjoying it and doing everything pretty well, doing a pretty good job. Then the people who were like not into it seemed really not into it. I think where things went wrong was at the very beginning, where I had a conversation with the group where we decided that we were going to agree on the tone of the game, and I asked people if we wanted to go more lighthearted or if we wanted it to go serious. And it's generally people seemed to land on like, we're okay with just making a good old regular classic D&D style fantasy world. And I said, that's great, let's move on, because I didn't want to dwell on one thing for too long. In hindsight, I think I should have spent some more time really clarifying, like, okay, these are the things that we're going to say, like, okay to do and create, and then these are, like, examples of things that we as a table and as a group are not okay with people making and creating. Like, the following might be true of, like, any RPG, but I think it is, like, particularly exponentially true for this game, right? Because if you have, like, even one player who is not 100% invested in like matching the energy and the expectations of everyone else at the table, the whole game can very quickly just spiral into complete and utter nonsense. Okay, so let's go back to even before starting the game. What was I trying to accomplish? What was I trying to fix by running this session at all? Okay, so my brother and I, we've got this fantasy world that we've been building and working on for ages, which obviously the both of us, we love, and we get extremely hype whenever we get the chance to play in this world and develop it further. But then when other people play in that world, they just don't have any investment in caring about what happens to the nations and to the people and cities and history or whatever, which is entirely fair, because like why would they care? So my idea was, all right, well, let's just play one of these games where we all work together to build one world, and then everyone has the same baseline level of investment into making this world as cool as possible. Okay, right, and then when history changes and nations rise and fall and all that good stuff, people will have, that emotional buy-in, and they'll care when things like that change. I don't know if we've 100% succeeded in that ground, and after this session, it made me realize the counterpoint, the other side to this, is that, like, at least when I run a session in my world, even if everyone else doesn't care and they're just playing solitaire on their phone the whole time, at the very least I get to write more and create more of my world. So even if the session is a flop, like, at least I feel like I've accomplished something. But now if we start playing sessions in this world and I don't really care about developing it, no one else has any investment in the world, what are we doing at all? No one gets any kind of win out of this situation. So we'll see how this ends up playing out and how I end up feeling by the end of this whole experience. I will say on a personal level, well, okay, I very much so wanted to leave as much of everything into the hands of everyone else as I possibly could. Again, because my main number one priority was getting other people to get invested in a world. So I wanted them to build as much of it as possible. I was kind of hoping we were going to lean away from the like Rick and Morty-esque lol XD random type of humorous world building, which not everyone went in on. So some people, again, this is where the conversation on tone comes back up. How we definitely should have got that 100% locked down, because then we ended up having like half the players building Rick and Morty, and then the other half of the players building the Forgotten Realms. Here's the thing with the Rick and Morty, the LOL XD random world building, is that like it can work and it can be interesting, right? When you just throw out a ridiculous, silly idea, like, you know, oh, well, what if our world had an Indian casino in it, right? And then you go through all the logical conclusions of like, okay, well, if our world has like an Indian casino, right? Like what kind of Indians is it that runs the casino? How did those Indians get there, right? And just like, you know, it's like, okay, so what? Do they have like portal technology or something? And then we have to discover like, okay, well, who created that portal technology? Is it aliens? Is it an interdimensional thing? Is it a time travel thing, right? And then you just keep answering all these logical conclusions of this ridiculous idea, and you end up getting something that's actually like pretty interesting and like weird and funny, and I would say like worthwhile exploring. But when you just do a random thing and then just leave it at random thing, then the whole thing kind of just comes across as a lol XD random moment, which I get the sense that stuff like that started to happen not because people were interested in just creating a silly idea and then seeing through the logical conclusion of that, but rather that we were getting a little bored. It was the second half of the session. People were losing interest, and people just wanted to start throwing stuff out there that would get a reaction out of people. Not ideally what I would have liked, but I don't think it's hopeless. I think we can recover. I will say, in general, broadly speaking, I don't think this game is well suited towards people that are crunk off of that giggle juice. You know, on the one hand, alcohol, it does make people more willing to be confrontational, which is an aspect that like this game vastly needs every single bit of help it can get towards pushing people towards that. But it also is very quick to make people feel detached and willing to be silly. Also, it did not help the handwriting situation. So I think most RPGs, right, I think actually are better with alcohol, because it makes people more willing to talk like wizards and elves, and they're more willing to embarrass themselves. And I think like most RPGs are like worse when everyone is like puffing on that reefer, but I think this game in particular, I very much so would have rathered people lean on the side of being a little paranoid and worrying about other people being judgmental of them and their decisions. I think I might have produced a little bit too much of a judgment-free zone. We might have need to bring back bullying a little bit. Okay. So another thing. I think in the future, if I ever play this game, I will definitely do it online, because I think that'll just make everything easier. And I think there's a lot of things that I dislike doing for realsies D&D online because of, but I think the convenience and everything of being able to draw a map and share it with everyone instantly just like outweighs the downsides of not being able to see each other face to face. I will say the thing that happens with all online games is that you have to struggle with people not being connected with each other. People definitely they didn't, like, there were moments of this, of people getting into the conversation angle of the game and people actually like asking like, hey, is it cool if we interact in this way, and like, do you think it would be neat if my history went in this direction, and just conversations like that. I definitely would have liked to see more of that, and I think in the future, if we run this again, I will definitely try to promote more of that conversation. But again, I think like online, there will be even less of that, and that'll be harder to do. It definitely seemed like people were very much so like waiting for their turn to add their creative input, which on the one hand, obviously, you don't want just one person talking on everyone else's turn and just telling them exactly what they think would be cool. Like, I definitely want to leave room for people to just come up with their own ideas and add them to the game without it having to be checked by the committee. But I would have liked like just like 2 notches more on the committee angle of the game. Maybe that's just because my players and I myself as well are just a little bit on the D&D pilled side, and are kind of just conditioned to think about these sort of RPGs like turn-based strategy games rather than like communal, cooperative, creative exercises. But yeah, no, I do think if we were to play this online, everyone is just going to be on their level 28 fighter, just grinding fireboars and parry on, and then we're going to have to say their name 28 times before they realize that it's their turn. And I do fear that going online, like, engagement would just somehow manage to go into the negative numbers. Which, I don't know if there's really any perfect solution to this other than just finding a group of people who all really like and enjoy hearing everyone else's ideas. The main point is going to be to try to do more activities where we foster even more of a community where everyone really loves to hear everyone else's creative ideas. Like in this game, like there were moments, when, for example, one of the players, Julian, he came up with this idea for like a swamp, and like that did actively make me feel good to hear about, and to hear him create this cool little mythological, fairy-esque type of location. And, I was like, this is cool. Like, this makes me feel good to hear. And then there were, like, other moments where people created things, and I was like, okay, well, this makes me feel not as good. But I do hope, we can just all get on the same page in the future. Which, again, I mostly want to just chalk this game up to a test, because this was all of my players' first time ever giving this a shot. So, like, I don't really put any blame on anyone. This really was just people dipping their toes in the water of this kind of a game. So I definitely, like, set my expectations too high. It ultimately, I should have expected this kind of result from this game. So it's honestly, it's fine. I like, it's fine. When I look at this from the perspective of a bunch of people who had never tried this before and were just like ultimately just doing their best, I am proud that everyone was able to like contribute and like work together to create a little piece of art. There's like definitely a bunch of universes where we don't even get through the whole session and the entire world just turns into gobbledygook soup before we can even get to age 3. So again, I'm happy that we managed to finish the game at all. Right? Like I could definitely, it didn't take long before I could feel the energy emanating off of people thinking that this was like lame and not cool. So I am happy that people were able to stick through with it until the very end. But yeah, no, I definitely see this session more as just like a proof of concept rather than like the grand universe and world that we are going to explore and develop for the rest of our lives. Especially on top of that, there's just a bunch of like problems that are fundamentally baked into the rules of the game. Even if everyone was like absolutely trying their hardest, I think we still would have made like a patchy, underdeveloped world that I was still not 100% content with, just because like the rules kind of push you in that direction. Like even if we were working with 5 J.R.R. Tolkien's, I think I would still want to like change the rules and then give the game a second shot. I still think though I'll definitely still do at least one session in this world. And you know, maybe when we do start playing in this world, something is gonna click and people are gonna realize like, oh wait, actually, like this is awesome. This should be the world that we play in forever. But I'm also thinking, if we don't do that, maybe change the rules of Dawn of Worlds and then run the game back and then have everyone sort of like be on the same page this time. And you know, maybe make it clear the second time, like, alright guys, this time we're gonna make our like magnum opus world and we're gonna play in that world forever. Maybe even go as far as to like break it up into a 3-shot, which I think will be far more doable online, and then just have like a whole section, like a whole session for H1, a session for H2, and a session for H3. Okay. Alright, so, you know, that was my doom and gloom, woe is me, complaining time. The criticism does come from a place of truly just wanting the best. And I do appreciate that even though people were probably not 100% sure if they were going to like this game, I'm very, very glad that people were willing to even give it a shot, you know, because even if I had the chance to play with 5 J.R.R. Tolkien's, I wouldn't even want to, because he's not my friend, and it would be weird and awkward. And he would probably put some pretty unironically racist stuff into the world. Okay, so let's talk some more nitty-gritty about Dawn of Worlds. So there's a bunch of other world-building games like Microscope, which I think is really neat, but again, it's like more so for a specific period of history, is my understanding, rather than creating an entire world. But I do really like Microscope after having looked into it, and I definitely want to try playing it and giving it a shot. There's also games like A Quiet Year, where, again, I think it has a bunch of really cool ideas in it, but again, you just use that to create a single year of like a settlement rather than creating an entire world. But again, I do think either playing a couple of games of Microscope or playing a couple of games in The Quiet Year inside the world that we had built, I think would be super duper cool. Especially because games like those require super little setup time, and I could just, if I have like any 4 people, we can just whip out a deck of cards and a piece of paper and like just start playing a game of The Quiet Year and get a bunch of really cool world building in. And definitely having to prep for games has been one of the things that has like drastically slowed down my ability to play like sessions of RPGs at all. So these like zero prep games like Microscope and A Quiet Year I think would be super awesome to play. Which I realized that I said that about my West Marches campaign, where I was like, oh yeah, we could just have any 4 people and we could just hop right into a session. But now I realize that I was 100% lying about that when it came to a West Marches, because I actually did want to do a bunch of prep for those games and create neat dungeons and make sure that player characters were in some way tied into having an interest in completing that dungeon. But yeah, I do think it would be cool to play a bunch of these games and like fully flesh out our world. But yeah, I'm not sure if I want to go 100% down into that angle with the world we just built, because I do want to like actually check in with people at least after our first session and see like, all right guys, like, are we feeling this world, or do you want to create a new one? Okay, so my main motivating factor was trying to get people invested into the world that we would be playing in. So now I want to talk a little bit about my secondary motivating factor, which is that I wanted to try to create the perfect conditions to make it as accessible as possible to get some of my other friends to give DMing a shot. And, one of my other friends, he asked me if I wanted other people to give DMing a shot so that I could finally get a chance to be a player. And I said, jokingly, like, no, I want other people to DM because I want them to share in my suffering. Which there's I do regret making that joke, but there is like a tiny little fragment of truth in there. Because like the real reason I want my friends to give DMing a shot is so that I just have more people to talk about the experience of DMing with. Which, one part of that is talking about and sharing in that the annoying parts that like you are not fond of when you DM. But that's only like one feeling when you are leading a group at a table in a game. There's like a million feelings that you feel. And, I want to be able to talk about those feelings with my friends and have them understand them. But here's one of my current concerns when it comes with trying to get other people to DM, and that's that as of late I've really gotten into my own homebrew system, which is probably not an ideal use for this, because as much as I do love my homebrew system, I would be creating an example and teaching people how to DM a game that like there's no book for. So if they wanted to like give DMing a shot, there wouldn't be any just straightforward thing they could start doing to like figure out how to DM. So I was thinking about going with Dungeon World because that's more of like a rules light-y game, but still on like that D&D spectrum. But as I was writing this and as I was looking into Dungeon World, I immediately remembered all the things that I don't like about it, and it reminds me why I made my own system. So I think it is going to be really hard to force myself to like go back to like any other system. So maybe if I can get people to express interest in DMing, right? If they're one of the people that have played D&D with me in the past, that would probably be the easiest route to pursue, just because there's an infinite amount of online resources and videos about how to run D&D, and D&D is like pretty easy to run. You just need to like get your players into like 2 or 3 combats, and then bada bing bada boom, that's like an entire session right there. So otherwise, if one of my friends like expresses any interest in running like a game in the system that I've been working on, then I'd have to like write an entire DMG or something. So we'll see what happens there. Okay, let's talk some more about the game Dawn of Worlds. What do I like and what do I not like? Okay, so here's what I like. And when I say what I like, I'm talking specifically about Dawn of Worlds as a collaborative, restricted world-building game. So I'm not including all the things that are just inherent to that kind of a game, as opposed to just sitting down and writing out a world or whatever. We're talking specifically unique rules to this game. I really like the 3-age system and how it has that sort of natural incentive of progression of like creating the land to populating the land to seeing how those populations interact with each other. I quite like the framing of the game as everyone being gods and interacting with their people through the form of their avatar. Reminds me of the game Black and White, which was a pretty cool game. Now, some of the things that I'm not as fond of, that I don't really care for, is that some of the rules just seem either counterintuitive and or contradictory. I mean, specifically the rules of the powers in the game. Another problem, the world usually just like doesn't get filled out. People just stick to their corner and just add stuff to their corner, and you end up getting a lot of bare patches by the end of the game, and people are very hesitant to engage in any kind of conflict with each other, so that can lead to some very not super realistic histories where everyone is just trading and having a good lighthearted time with each other. The entire game, right, obviously you try to use the various point costs to incentivize and encourage behavior, But you also don't really want people to care about the point costs, right? Because you just want them to like do stuff that's cool and interesting, even if it is point inefficient. Which I don't think there's any perfect synthesis to this kind of like contradiction. I think it's what makes designing this type of game in particular like just super difficult to do. But again, this is the balancing act in every RPG ever. Like in D&D, what is the goal, right? Is the goal to win or is the goal to tell a cool, interesting story? Well, obviously it's the latter. Everyone wants to play D&D to tell a cool story. But if that's the goal, then why are we rolling dice to attack and hit and whatever? Why don't we just figure out and decide which one would make for a better story and then just do that, right? But even though that's kind of like an inherent truth in D&D, that people seem like they can relatively easily get over by saying like, oh no, well it's like the chance of not knowing what's going to happen and then having to figure it out like as you happen and like how to turn those random results into a good story. But this like effect seems much more pronounced in Dawn of Worlds, where like people seem to have a much harder time getting over that barrier of like how randomness or anything in these decisions can lead to a better story. Just like in Dawn of Worlds, even though it's the same fundamental sort of issue as every other RPG, somehow in Dawn of Worlds it just feels a lot more immediately fake. And my hypothesis is that I think that's due to more of like the lack of cohesiveness, or not necessarily cohesive, but like the lack of consistency in the rules of like Dawn of Worlds, rather than there either being like too many or like too few rules or anything like that. So when I ran the game, I did change a few things. Like I had people roll at the end of their turn instead of the start of their turn. That way people could know, however, exactly how many points they were working with, and then they could come up with what they want to do on their turn while everyone else was like figuring out, or while everyone else was like actively taking their turn, which worked a little bit. But I think I would go back to people rolling at the start of their turn, because then there's that tension of like, oh, you know, am I going to get enough points to respond to like so and so situation and, you know, be able to save my people and their empire. Speaking of which, I think I would change around some of the powers, like the catastrophes, where I think I would like change them in a way that you now like announce that what catastrophe is going to occur, and then it actively, like, it doesn't actually occur until your next turn. That way people have some room to like interact with hearing with the like coming of that catastrophe. Then maybe you could like otherwise just spend like double points to just instantly make a catastrophe happen. So other things that I would add, I definitely would add some more rules to like Age 1 to really try to make sure that the map is like mostly filled out. Maybe just everyone has to spend the first 2 turns or whatever spending all their points to shape land or something. I don't know, honestly, but like there definitely needs to be a little bit more of a push towards like filling up the map with land. And the game kind of has like a built-in failsafe in the sense that like you continue every age if everyone like votes to continue every age, which on the one hand, I guess like that does kind of work and that does fix all the problems, but on the other hand, it feels like a little bit arbitrary, and I don't know, it makes the whole time of the ages, I feel a little bit less valuable. So the other thing is people being afraid of confrontation, which definitely makes sense because the whole game is just a Cold War simulator. Except people aren't limited to nukes. Everyone has got the straight up literal infinite power of the author to level an entire nation if they wish. So I do feel like this game could really use a kind of cosmic encounter type of Destiny deck where like you draw a card that determines like a specific other player that you attack, which both like acts as an excuse to take confrontational action with another person, and it kind of like protects you from retaliation in the sense that like they would have to draw your card in order to attack you back. But I'm not sure how you could like really introduce that kind of a mechanic without grossly overstepping on people's freedoms to do whatever they want, which is like a great appeal of playing like a god game like at all. And like I could definitely see the enforcement of a Destiny deck really getting in the way of people being able to tell whatever story that they want to tell. So maybe there's a way that you could like add a Destiny deck and then also like an ability to veto it when you so wish. Now you're no longer getting rid of the whole excuse as to why you have to like attack people. So I don't know what really how to do that, but I feel like there's got to be something that we could conceivably add to give people an excuse to be confrontational with each other. So basically, if I were to make Dawn of Worlds 2.0, I think I would rewrite all the powers to very explicitly make sure that none of their effects overlap with each other. And I think I would add like a special, unique rule to each age to more so encourage and incentivize the powers that are associated with the premise of that age, and either making them more interesting and more diverse, or just making them like more guaranteed to occur. Okay. Alright, so now let us discuss the world that we had made. So we did not decide on a name yet, so until such time, I'm going to call it unnamed _world_1. So, the first god, we have got Vince, who is played as the light god, the god of light, who was aptly named Sun. So Sun has got a mask motif, which was pretty cool, one of Sun's subdomains. And Sun created a mega city, or a city called Mega City, made up of 4 smaller cities. There is Nicaragua with a G, home of the gnomes, who are the most devout people of Sun. Urg, home of the giants, who are expert glass blowers. Suntopia, home of the humans. Scarville, home of the goblins, who are expert textile manufacturers. They are all good-aligned people, and every combination of crossbreed between those 4 people exist. The gnomes have an order of missionaries that have spread across the world, and Mega City is a center of global trade that is the center of a global trade network that runs through the entire world. Next up, we have got Scott, who is playing as Selah, god of death and change, who, in the first age, created the Cliffs of Brahm and the Forest of Chance, and in their demiplane, their domain, the Underworld, they made that into farmland. And on the material plane, they formed the River Gold. They summoned their avatar, Goritriox, a dragon of changing forms. Then they made a mountain range, and in the Second Age, we were introduced to the Chance Elves, who founded the city of Hillcrest. They then created a subrace called the Toll Elves, who built the city of Riverwolts, and then they founded the city of Necron. Then they formed an order of alchemists, and they then made a second avatar in the form of a golem, and the 2 groups of elves combined forces and started creating armies, and the Toll Elves became expert ship builders, and they would combine their knowledge of alchemy and shipwrightsmanship to create a fleet of alchemical powered ships, and they would dominate the sea with their naval power. After that, we have got Simon, who was our god of knowledge and birds, known as Archegon, who is served by their avatar Savio, the blind sage, who lives on the island of Lucent. It has a massive volcano surrounded by jungle, and to the south he claimed the island in the middle of our map, and he added hills and rivers to it, and created the Avis, a group of flightless bird people, and founded the city Tanto. They then created the Order of Volantes, who had the goal of flying to the Aether so that they may meet their god. To the south of Avis, there came to be the Platons, who are a group of cave-dwelling lizard people. Then the Volantes constructed the Tower of Enlightenment in an attempt to reach their god. They then founded the city of Projectus, and they started to discover flying technology. And they would send gliders off the top of their tower to travel across the world. Then they started making a fleet of ships, and they created an outpost at Lucent, at the volcano where their avatar is, and they began engaging in a ritual where the Avis would be thrown into the volcano, and heretics and blasphemers would be sent to a fiery grave, and then truly devout champions of Archegon would gain the ability to fly and would be able to escape imminent death. Okay, and then they started sending their glider missionaries to Magdalena Bay, which we'll get to that city later. That was of another player. And in the response to their island outpost being attacked, they raised a bunch of armies and reclaimed their island of Lucent. They then started advancing their war technology and expanding their cities. And then catastrophe had struck, there we go, okay, and caused their Tower of Enlightenment to collapse. And the Avis formed a new order called the Oscurus, who would try to get as deep into the earth as possible to get away from their god. And they started digging an underground network of tunnels. Now let us talk about Joey, who was playing as Sena, the wet god of the sea. The first thing they did was make Sun very mad by turning Sun's Lake into a bay. Then they spruced up that bay with some rivers and cliffs and waterfalls and rainy mountains, and they brought their avatar of the same name, Sena, who took the form of a beautiful mermaid. They then made a race of fish folk, who are experts of music and dance, and are generally found to be conventionally attractive, according to all the other races. Then they got split up into a couple of sub-races. So we had the common fish folk, who are the laborers and workers, and then the parliament fish folk, who are the ruling class, and are like extra super beautiful. They all live in the city of Magdalena Bay. It is an underwater city and has a sister city above ground called Rwanda. The fishfolk are experts in clandestine espionage activity, so they're all expert spy fish people. Then there was a catastrophic economic Great Depression, and a bunch of groups of fishfolk banded together to go out into the world and to find fortune. These nomadic fishfolk formed two new cities, Nina and Pintia, but these new fishfolk cities are corrupted and considered by Sena to be blasphemous. Nina forms the Indian Casino, which is the best casino in the world, while Pinto lands on the same island as the bird folk. The fish folk there get reconquisted, so they move to a new part of the island and found the city of New Pinta, and they start advancing their weapon technology and start forming armies. And at the very end, they are wiped out by an acid tsunami that also incidentally hit the birdfolk city of Tanto. Okay, then Julian was our trickster god, Vo, who created the Bog of Returning, a magical swamp where no matter where you enter from, you will always leave from that spot. And then they created the tropical island of Zis, surrounded by jagged mountains, where his avatar. Oh god, I had this somewhere. R'lyeh is rumored to live, and the island is otherwise populated with rare and exotic monsters. Then he created the Forest of Adar, a vast and lush land inhabited by tribal frogmen known as the Sil, who worship their avatar R'lyeh and have a positive, symbiotic relationship with him. Then he created a cave in the center of the Bog of Returning that contains gold and gems and valuable minerals, and he created a couple of craters. He then created his demi-plane, a realm of infinite gambling where when you win, you just have to keep playing until you lose, and then when you lose, you have to keep playing to make up for your losses. Then he created a new avatar, Nil, who guards the cave in the center of the Bog of Returning. Then the Sil founded a city in the Forest of Adar known as Sireth. They go on pilgrimages to the cave of Nil, where they gather gold and treasures, which they use to fund their gambling houses. Then he made a new sub-race of the Woodland Sil. They hold festivals in honor of Nil and have gained the ability to traverse through the Bog of Returning, allowing them to found a new city known as Itha on the peninsula, and have gained a port that will allow them to trade to the rest of the world using their supply of gold. They then continue to improve and advance themselves by getting better ships and making walls and creating armies. They're generally a civilization of kind, wealthy gamblers. And at last we have Gabe, who is playing the god of war Kel'Darel, god of beasts and authority, who started with creating glaciers on the map and developing his celestial plane, the Tower of 1,000 Blades. He then created more mountains and glaciers and brought his avatar unto the world. He created a race of giants and then a race of dwarfs. The giants then started advancing their weapon technology and started to raise some armies. Then the dwarves and giants went to war, resulting in a wasteland being formed. The giants turned out victorious, and they took the dwarfs as their slaves and constructed their capital city in the wasteland known as Irnonder. They then formed the Order of the Bloody Fist, began raising more armies. They corrupted the city of Riverwolves and invaded the outpost of the Abyss, where their avatar Savio calls home. They then started raising many more armies, and at this point we had experienced the Deathless Decade, an event by the god of death who had gone missing for 10 years and prevented anyone in the world from being able to die. Then the giants began to expand the borders of the realm, and they unleashed a plague of violence upon Riverwolves, causing the Tall Elves to go mad and begin killing each other. Thus concludes the history of unnamed _world_1. In conclusion, on the one hand, I'm very happy that that of what we were able to make here. And we'll say, overall, I don't want this to sound negative, because I think for the most part everyone did a great job, but there were a handful, a couple of moments that made me question if people were taking those actions in an attempt to ridicule the idea of playing this game, or I don't know, the fact that we were playing it at all. I don't know. So overall, my morale bar is not, it's not full. It's definitely on the I wouldn't say we're necessarily wavering yet, but we're maybe like we're definitely one charge in the flank away from getting broken. But I'm going to huff that copium, and I'm going to convince myself that people taking those more goofy, silly actions was a defense mechanism, and maybe they were a little afraid of like being vulnerable and revealing parts of themselves, and this whole maybe we're a little afraid of what they might have revealed about their creative process by engaging in this game in a genuine manner, But I hope now that people sort of got that out of the system, maybe if we do this again, people will be totally ready to lay their heart bare on the table. But before I get stuck in that trap of getting stuck in the weeds of negativity, I'm going to end on a positive note and do a doling out of a bit of an awards ceremony. So to Joey, you far and away win Best Artist. You absolutely blew everyone out of the water when it came to making your realm look cool and good. So, you've certainly earned the right to upgrade the rest of the map to match your artistic vision in the future. And you either had the best handwriting or were tied for the best handwriting, so I do greatly appreciate that as well. To Simone, you win the award of Creative Writing Master. You very dexterously rode that line between weird and serious, where your ideas were just bizarre enough to be unique and thought-provoking and interesting and novel, but not so crazy that it felt like a throwaway joke. And also, you managed to actually have like a theme with your people, and you managed to tell a story with the rise and fall of your peoples. So I found all of that to be very impressive. To Scott, you win Rookie of the Year for being new to our group. You greatly impressed me with your ability to just instantly understand the assignment and just like get into the game and think outside the box with some of your usages of powers. And I did quite like your sort of creative interpretation of some of the mechanics and how you used those in order to make cool, interesting historical events happen. To Julian, you win the award of Lore Master. You most definitely kept the best notes and have given me easily the most to work off of when it comes to creating future sessions, which ultimately was the whole point of this project. So you're definitely the most likely to see what you worked on and created to come up in the future, and you were the one that definitely made writing this postpartum script a lot easier, because I could actually just like read your notes and then write down what happened rather than just try to remember what people did. To Gabe, you win Best Instigator. I appreciate that you were among the very few that actively tried to stir the pot and actually were willing to antagonize other people, but you managed to do so in like a restrained, controlled way, and that you didn't just like annihilate anyone else to the point where they weren't having fun or anything. So you did a good job of managing that balance between your aggression and not taking it too far in either direction. And to Vince, I award the title of Grand Unifier. You are the group that holds the glue together. Without you, I wouldn't even know half the people at the table. So your willingness to actively help me with the logistics side of the game and actively make sure that everyone has a means of getting to the game, then, without you, the whole game might not have ever even have happened. So, like, as a DM, it is absolutely not lost on me the value of anyone who is actually willing to help out behind the scenes. Okay, so that's about it. Tune in next time. We will run a session in this world, and if people respond well, then we're going to take this world and run with it. And if people respond not as well, then we will use this game as a learning experience, and then we'll make a new, better world, and then this time everyone will be ready to give it their all. And then, if the second world doesn't live up to my unattainable standards, then I don't even want to be around anymore. Okay. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.